The diner waitress never spoke much, just poured coffee and took orders with mechanical precision. When armed robbers stormed in, everyone expected her to hide behind the counter. Instead, she disarmed both men in under 10 seconds, using techniques that weren't taught in any civilian self-defense class. Welcome to Secrets Never Told. Before we begin this powerful story of silence, skill, and hidden identity, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this need to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure they are. The Triple Creek Diner sat on Route 78 like a forgotten memory, its neon sign flickering weakly against the Nevada desert sky. The place hadn't been updated since 1987, and it showed in every vinyl booth crack and coffee-stained countertop. But the locals didn't come for the ambiance. They came for the coffee, which was strong, and the silence, which was reliable. Behind the counter, Sarah Michelle moved with quiet efficiency. At 28, she possessed the kind of natural beauty that stopped conversations when she walked into a room. Platinum blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, striking blue eyes that seemed to see everything, and a face that belonged on magazine covers rather than serving coffee to truckers and highway wanderers. Her uniform was always pressed, her movements precise, and her smile polite but distant. The regulars had learned not to make passes. There was something about Sarah that discouraged familiarity. She took orders, served food, refilled coffee, and collected tips with mechanical precision. No small talk, no personal questions answered. Just service, delivered with professional courtesy and nothing more. Danny Morrison, who owned the garage across the street, had been coming in for 3 years and couldn't recall Sarah ever mentioning a last name, hometown, or family. When his wife asked him about that pretty waitress, all Danny could say was that she worked hard and minded her own business. The diner operated on predictable rhythms. Morning rush from 6 to 9 a.m. brought truckers grabbing coffee and egg sandwiches before hitting the road. Lunch crowd was sparse, mostly local workers from the nearby mining operation. Evenings were quiet, just a few stragglers and the occasional traveler seeking refuge from the desert highway. Sarah worked the day shift, 7 days a week. She lived in a small apartment above the pharmacy next door, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and was never seen anywhere else in town except for occasional grocery runs. No social life, no friends, no hobbies that anyone knew about. Manager Lou Fernandez had hired her 4 years ago when she walked in with no references, no work history, and cash for the first month's rent on the apartment. She'd worked every day since without calling in sick once. Lou didn't ask questions. Good help was hard to find in a town like Triple Creek. On that particular Tuesday morning in March, the diner hummed with its usual quiet energy. Sarah refilled coffee for Jim Hendricks, a mine foreman who'd been coming in for eggs over easy every morning since the Clinton administration. She served pancakes to a young family passing through on their way to California. She wiped down counters that were already clean and checked salt shakers that were already full. At 10:47 a.m., 2 men walked through the front door. The first thing Sarah noticed wasn't their faces or clothes, but their hands, the way they kept them loose at their sides, ready, the way their eyes swept the room in practiced arcs, cataloging exits and potential threats, the way they positioned themselves to create overlapping fields of coverage. These weren't customers. The first man was tall and lean, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that looked too new. His companion was shorter, broader, with a nervous energy that radiated from his fidgeting fingers. Both had the hollow-eyed look of men who'd been awake too long and moving too fast. Sarah set down the coffee pot and stepped back from the counter, her movement so subtle that none of the customers noticed. But her weight shifted to the balls of her feet, her center of gravity lowered by inches, and her breathing slowed to a controlled rhythm. The tall man approached the counter while his partner moved toward the back of the diner, positioning himself where he could watch the kitchen and rear exit. Classic two-man operation, Sarah noted automatically. Amateur but not stupid. Coffee? She asked, her voice maintaining its usual neutral tone. The tall man reached into his jacket. When his hand emerged, it held a chrome-plated .38 revolver. Empty the register, he said quietly. Nobody needs to get hurt. The diner went silent. Jim Hendricks froze with a fork full of eggs halfway to his mouth. The young family in booth 3 pulled their children closer. An elderly woman near the window opened her mouth to scream, then thought better of it. Sarah looked at the gun with calm assessment. .38 special, snub nose, probably 5 shots. The man's grip was wrong, thumb positioned too high. First time stick-up, she diagnosed, or at least inexperienced with handguns. Sure thing, she said, moving toward the register with measured steps. The second gunman, covering the back of the diner, called out nervously, "Hurry up, Rick. Let's get this done." Names, Sarah noted. Amateurs, definitely. She opened the register drawer slowly, the ancient cash machine dinging as it slid out. "There's about 300 here," she said, "mostly small bills." "All of it," Rick replied, his voice trying for menace but landing somewhere around anxious urgency. Sarah began counting counting bills deliberately, her movements creating a rhythm designed to lower tension. "You boys seem nervous," she observed conversationally. "First time. Shut up and count," Rick snapped, but his gun hand was starting to shake. Behind him, his partner wiped sweat from his forehead despite the diner's cool air. "Come on, man. Grab it and let's go." That's when everything changed. Rick turned his head to respond to his partner, taking his eyes off Sarah for just a moment. In that instant, she moved. Her left hand swept up and caught Rick's wrist, redirecting the gun away from the customer, while her right hand struck his elbow joint with precise force. The gun discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as his grip broke, the weapon spinning away across the checkered linoleum floor. Before Rick could process what had happened, Sarah's knee found his solar plexus, doubling him over. She spun him around, applying a rear-naked chokehold that cut off blood flow to his brain without restricting his breathing. Technical, clean, efficient. Rick went limp in 6 seconds. The second gunman spun around, fumbling for his own weapon, but Sarah was already moving. She released the unconscious Rick, letting him crumple to the floor, and crossed the diner in 4 quick strides. The second man managed to clear his gun from his waistband, but Sarah's hand was already there, controlling the weapon and his wrist. She applied leverage that forced his finger off the trigger while simultaneously sweeping his legs. He hit the floor hard, and the gun skittered under a booth. Sarah knelt beside him, applying a pressure point hold that caused immediate, overwhelming pain without permanent damage. The man gasped and went still, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. Total elapsed time, 11 seconds. The diner remained frozen in absolute silence. Steam rose from abandoned coffee cups, the smell of gunpowder mixed with bacon grease and disinfectant. Nobody moved. Sarah stood up, smoothing her uniform and checking her ponytail. She picked up both weapons, emptied the cylinders, and set the guns and ammunition on separate tables. Then she walked to the phone behind the counter and dialed 911. "Triple Creek Diner," she said calmly. "2 men attempted an armed robbery. They're unconscious, but breathing. You'll want to send an ambulance and sheriff's deputies." She hung up and surveyed the room. "Everyone okay?" The young family nodded wordlessly. Jim Hendricks blinked slowly and set down his fork. The elderly woman by the window crossed herself and whispered what might have been a prayer. Sarah walked back to Rick, who was beginning to stir, and knelt beside him. She checked his pulse, lifted his eyelids to assess his pupils, and positioned him in the recovery position with clinical precision. "You'll be fine," she told him. "Headache for a few hours, but no permanent damage." Rick looked up at her with confused eyes. "Who? What are you?" Sarah didn't answer. She moved to check on his partner, who was conscious, but still immobilized by whatever pressure point technique she'd used. Sheriff Tom Bradley arrived 12 minutes later with 2 deputies, an ambulance, and a lot of questions. He'd known Sarah for 4 years as the quiet waitress who served good coffee and never caused trouble. He'd never seen anything like what the witnesses described. "Walk me through it again," he said, for the 3rd time as the paramedics loaded the 2 would-be robbers into the ambulance. Sarah repeated her story with the same calm precision. She'd gotten lucky, she insisted. The first gunman was inexperienced and careless. She'd taken some self-defense classes at a gym in Reno. Simple explanation for a simple situation. Sheriff Bradley wasn't convinced. He'd been a cop for 22 years, including 6 years in Las Vegas before taking the job in Triple Creek. He'd seen plenty of people defend themselves, and he'd never seen anything like Sarah's controlled, systematic takedown of 2 armed men. "What kind of self-defense classes?" he asked. "Mixed martial arts," Sarah replied. "Basic stuff." "At which gym?" "I don't remember the name. It closed a few years ago." Bradley made notes he knew wouldn't lead anywhere. Sarah's story would check out because she would make sure it checked out. But his instincts told him there was more to the quiet waitress than anyone in Triple Creek had ever imagined. The next morning, the diner was packed. Word had spread quickly through the small town, and everyone wanted to see the waitress who'd taken down 2 armed robbers like she was swatting flies. Sarah served coffee and took orders with her usual efficiency, deflecting questions and praise with equal grace. But things had changed. Jim Hendricks couldn't stop staring at her hands as she poured his coffee, remembering how quickly and precisely they'd moved. The young family from the day before had stopped by to thank her, and the father had mentioned that Sarah's techniques looked like something he'd seen in military training videos. Lou Fernandez pulled Sarah aside during the lunch lull. "Media's calling," he said. "Local news wants to interview you about yesterday." "I'm not interested," Sarah replied, wiping down a table that was already clean. "Figured as much. But this kind of attention, it brings questions. People are curious about you now." Sarah nodded. She understood. Her careful anonymity had been shattered in 11 seconds of necessary action. That afternoon, a man in a suit walked into the Triple Creek Diner. He was tall, well-groomed, and carried himself with the kind of authority that made other men straighten their posture. He took a booth in the back and ordered coffee. Sarah served him without comment, but she noticed things. The way he sat with his back to the wall, facing the door, the slight bulge under his left armpit that suggested a shoulder shoulder holster, the way his eyes tracked her movements with professional interest. When the diner emptied for the dinner shift change, the man approached the counter. "Sarah Michelle Torres," he said quietly. Sarah's hand stilled on the coffee pot. She looked up and met his eyes for the first time. "Do we know each other?" "I'm Agent David Reeves, FBI. We need to talk." Sarah set down the coffee pot and removed her apron. "Lou," she called to the kitchen. "Taking my break." She led Agent Reeves to a booth in the far corner, away from the few remaining customers. They sat across from each other like chess players, considering their opening moves. "Impressive work yesterday," Reeves said. "Clean, professional. The kind of technique that requires serious training. Like I told the sheriff, I took some self-defense classes. Right, at a gym in Reno that doesn't exist." Reeves pulled out a tablet and scrolled through several screens. "Sarah Michelle Torres. No social security number before 4 years ago. No employment history, no educational records, no family connections." Sarah remained silent. "But we did find some interesting things," Reeves continued. "The techniques you used yesterday. Rear naked choke applied correctly to render unconscious without causing trauma. Nerve point manipulation for pain compliance and immobilization. These aren't taught in civilian self-defense classes." "What do you want?" Sarah asked. "I want to know who you are, or more specifically, who you were before you became Sarah Michelle Torres, waitress." Sarah looked out the window at the desert highway, where trucks carried their loads toward distant destinations and travelers sought refuge from the emptiness between cities. "Why does it matter?" "Because 3 months ago, a CIA safe house was compromised in Eastern Europe. 4 operatives were killed. 1 disappeared without a trace." Reeves turned the tablet toward her, showing a photograph of a blonde woman in military dress uniform. The face was younger, the hair shorter, but unmistakably the same person sitting across from him. "Lieutenant Sarah Michelle Kane," Reeves read. "Army Intelligence, Special Operations Liaison, specialized in deep cover infiltration and close quarters combat. Officially listed as killed in action. Prague, December 15th. Sarah studied the photograph without expression. "She's dead." "Is she?" "Because yesterday, a dead woman used techniques taught only to special operations personnel to neutralize 2 armed subjects with textbook precision." The diner's neon sign flickered against the gathering dusk. Sarah watched the light dance across the empty highway and considered her option. "If you know who I am," she said finally, "then you know why I'm dead. I know you were burned. I know your cover was blown and your team was compromised. What I don't know is whether you went dark on your own or if someone helped you." Sarah met his eyes. "Does it matter?" "It matters because there are people looking for you. People who believe you have information they want." "What kind of people?" "The kind that killed your team in Prague." Sarah processed this information with the same calm efficiency she'd shown during the robbery. Threat assessment, response option, risk mitigation. The analytical framework was still there, buried under 4 years of coffee service and small-town anonymity. "What are you proposing?" she asked. "We bring you in. Full debrief, protective custody, new identity with better documentation. In exchange, you tell us everything you know about the Prague operation and who compromised it." Sarah shook her head. "I've been dead for 4 years. Dead is safe. Dead is temporary," Reeves corrected. "Yesterday's video is already online. Local news ran the story this morning. Someone with the right connections and enough motivation will put the pieces together." As if summoned by his words, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Nice work at the diner. We need to talk." -M Sarah showed Reeves the message. His expression darkened. "How long?" she asked. "If they're reaching out directly, you've got maybe 6 hours before this place becomes very dangerous for everyone in it." Sarah looked around the diner that had been her refuge for 4 years. The cracked vinyl booths where she'd served coffee to the same customers every morning. The ancient register where she'd counted tips and small bills. The kitchen where Lou cooked eggs and bacon and minded his own business. "The people here," she said, "they'll be safe. If you come with me now. Yes, if you stay." Reeves left the implications unspoken. Sarah stood up. "Give me 10 minutes to get my thing." She went upstairs to her small apartment and packed quickly. Clothes, documents, a few personal items. Everything fit in a single duffel bag, the same one she'd carried into Triple Creek 4 years ago. At the bottom of her closet, wrapped in an old towel, was a Sig Sauer P226 and 3 magazines of ammunition. She checked the weapon, verified the load, and tucked it into the small of her back. Before leaving, she wrote a note for Lou. "Family emergency. Won't be back. Thanks for everything. S." She left it on the counter next to the coffee machine and walked out of the Triple Creek diner for the last time. Agent Reeves was waiting by a black SUV parked behind the building. "Ready?" Sarah took one last look at the neon sign flickering against the desert sky. "Sarah Michelle Torres is dead now, too." "Sarah Michelle Kane wasn't that easy to kill the first time," Reeves observed as they drove away from Triple Creek. "Something tells me she'll be even harder to kill the second time." As they disappeared into the Nevada darkness, the diner's lights continued to flicker, casting long shadows across across empty booths where a dead woman had served coffee and hidden from a world that had forgotten she ever existed. But Sarah's story didn't end on that desert highway. 3 hours later, as they drove through the Nevada mountains, Reeves received a call that changed everything. "Sir, we have a problem," came the voice through the encrypted phone. "The Prague files have been declassified. Someone leaked the entire operation online 2 hours ago." Reeves pulled over at a roadside rest stop. "How much?" "Everything. Names, dates, operational details. The whole network is blown." Sarah listened to the conversation without expression, but her mind was already calculating. If Prague was public, then everyone involved was a target. Not just her, but anyone who'd ever worked with her, helped her, or even suspected her identity. "The diner," she said quietly. Reeves looked at her with understanding. "Lou, the customers, anyone who witnessed yesterday's incident. They're all potential leverage now." Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo message. Lou Fernandez tied to a chair in what looked like the diner's storage room. The accompanying text read, "Return to Triple Creek alone, or the old man learns what happens to people who help ghosts." "Turn around," Sarah said. "That's suicide. It's obviously a trap. Lou doesn't deserve to die because I served him coffee for 4 years." Reeves studied her face in the dim light of the dashboard. "You know this is exactly what they want. They're using him as bait." "I know." Sarah checked her weapon and counted her remaining ammunition. "But Lou's not a soldier. He's not trained for this. He's just a good man who gave me a job and never asked questions." "Sarah, listen to me. If we go back there, we're playing by their rules, on their term. The smart play is to contact local law enforcement, establish a perimeter, and by the time we coordinate with local law enforcement, Lou will be dead." Sarah's voice carried the flat certainty of someone who'd seen too many good people die for someone else's war. "These aren't weekend warriors or desperate criminals. They're professionals, and they're here for me." Reeves made a U-turn on the empty highway. "Then we do this smart. I've got backup 20 minutes out, tactical support, surveillance equipment." "No backup," Sarah interrupted. "They'll be watching for that. Any sign of federal involvement and Lou dies immediately." "So what's your plan?" Sarah smiled for the first time since leaving the diner, and Reeves felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't the expression of a waitress or even a soldier. It was the smile of a predator who just remembered what she was capable of. "I'm going to remind them why they thought I was dead in the first place." They arrived at Triple Creek just after 2 a.m. The town was silent, dark except for a few streetlights and the persistent glow of the diner's neon sign. Sarah studied the building through binoculars from a hill overlooking the highway. "2 vehicles," she reported. "Black sedan behind the diner, SUV parked across the street. Professional positioning, good sight lines, escape routes covered. How many inside? Unknown. But they'll have Lou somewhere visible from the front windows, probably the main dining area. They'll want me to see him when I walk in." Reeves handed her a small communication device. "At least take this. If things go sideways." Sarah removed the device's battery and dropped both pieces out the window. "If things go sideways, radio chatter will get us all killed." She began stripping off her civilian clothes, revealing tactical gear she'd retrieved from a hidden cache during their journey back. Black pants, combat boots, a fitted shirt that allowed for movement. She secured her weapon and checked her equipment with the methodical precision of someone preparing for war. "Sarah," Reeves said quietly, "these people killed your entire team in Prague. They're not going to let you walk out of there." "I don't plan to walk out," she replied. "I plan to be the only one still breathing when it's over." She slipped out of the SUV and disappeared into the desert darkness like smoke. Reeves waited, watching the diner through his own binoculars, counting the minutes and wondering if he'd just watched a dead woman walk to her second death. Inside the Triple Creek diner, Lou Fernandez sat tied to a chair in the center of the dining area, exactly where Sarah had predicted. His face was bruised, but his eyes were alert, angry rather than afraid. 2 men in tactical gear flanked the windows, their weapons trained on the approaches to the building. The man who seemed to be in charge sat casually in Sarah's usual section, drinking coffee from one of her clean mugs. His name was Victor Kozlov, though Lou didn't know that. What Lou did know was that these men had come asking questions about his waitress, and when he'd refused to answer, they'd made their position clear with violence. "She's not coming," Lou said for the 3rd time. "Sarah's just a waitress. Whatever you think she is, you're wrong." Kozlov smiled without warmth. "Mr. Fernandez, your waitress disarmed 2 men yesterday using techniques I learned in Spetsnaz training. Your waitress has been living under a dead woman's identity for 4 years. Your waitress killed 3 of my men in Prague and disappeared with information that cost my organization $40 million. You're crazy, perhaps, but she's coming anyway, because she's developed an inconvenient attachment to ordinary people like you." At 2:47 a.m., the diner's lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, casting eerie shadows throughout the building. Kozlov's men moved to predetermined positions, their night vision equipment giving them tactical advantage in the dimly lit space. "She's here," Kozlov announced unnecessarily. The first indication that Sarah had arrived came not through the doors or windows, but from above. A ceiling tile shifted slightly, so subtle that only professional eyes would have noticed. Kozlov smiled and raised his weapon toward the sound. The tile dropped suddenly, followed by a small metal canister that rolled across the floor between the gunman's position. The flashbang grenade detonated with overwhelming light and sound, temporarily blinding everyone in the diner except for Sarah, who'd been wearing protective equipment. She dropped through the ceiling opening like a ghost, landing silently behind the first gunman. Her knife found the gap between his body armor and helmet before he could recover from the flashbang. He collapsed without making a sound. The second gunman, partially recovered, spun toward the source of movement. Sarah was already gone, having rolled behind the counter. His bullets shattered coffee mugs and destroyed the ancient cash register, but found only empty air. Sarah emerged from behind the counter with her sidearm drawn, putting 2 rounds center mass into the second gunman before he could adjust his aim. The man dropped, his weapon clattering across the checkered floor. "Impressive," Kozlov called out from his position near Lou's chair. "But predictable. You always were too attached to civilians, Lieutenant Kane." Sarah stepped into the dim light, her weapon trained on Kozlov's head. "Let him go, Victor. This is between us." "Indeed it is, but Mr. Fernandez has become useful leverage." Kozlov pressed his pistol against Lou's temple. "Drop your weapon or I paint these walls with his brains." Lou looked up at Sarah with eyes that held no fear, only concern. "Don't do it, kiddo. Whatever this is about, it's not worth your life." Sarah's aim never wavered. "Victor, you made a mistake coming here." "Did I? You're outnumbered, outgunned, and I have the one thing you can't afford to lose." "You're right," Sarah agreed. "I can't afford to lose him, but you made one critical error in your planning, which is, you assumed I came alone." The diner's front door exploded inward as Agent Reeves and a tactical team stormed the building. Kozlov spun toward the new threat, his weapon moving away from Lou's head for just a moment. It was all Sarah needed. Her shot took Kozlov in the shoulder, spinning him away from Lou and sending his weapon flying. Before he could recover, Sarah was on him, her knife at his throat. "The Prague files," she said quietly. "Who ordered the leak?" Kozlov laughed despite the blood running down his arm. "You think this ends with me? You think killing me solves anything? I don't plan to kill you, Victor. I plan to trade you." As federal agents secured the scene and paramedics checked Lou for injuries, Sarah sat in the booth where she'd served coffee every morning for 4 years. The diner would never be the same. Bullet holes scarred the walls, broken glass covered the floor, and the smell of cordite had replaced the familiar aroma of bacon and coffee. Lou approached her, moving slowly but under his own power. "You saved my life," he said simply. "I put your life in danger by being here. Kid, I've been running this diner for 20 years. I've seen truck drivers, traveling salesmen, families on vacation, and runaway teenagers. I've gotten pretty good at reading people." Lou sat down across from her. "I always knew you were running from something. I just never cared what it was." Sarah looked up at him. "I'm sorry, Lou, for all of this." "Don't be. You gave me 4 years of the best help I ever had. Never complained, never called in sick, never caused trouble. Until last night, I would have said you were the most peaceful person I'd ever met." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, surrounded by the aftermath of violence in a place that had been their shared sanctuary. "Where will you go now?" Lou asked. "I don't know. Depends on what the federal government decides to do with me." Agent Reeves approached their table. "Actually, we've got a proposition for you, Sarah. The kind of work you used to do, but with better oversight and legal authority. Interested?" Sarah looked around the destroyed diner one last time. "Will it involve serving coffee? Probably not. Then count me in." Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who serve your coffee with a smile and never ask for anything more than a decent tip. Have you ever wondered about the quiet people around you? The ones who blend into the background, who seem ordinary until the moment they're not? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story made you look twice at the people in your everyday life, subscribe to Secrets Never Told, because sometimes the most incredible stories are hidden in plain sight.